Hey, good morning. Today we're going to talk about hurricanes. That's been number one comment you guys said you wanted to know more about, especially my family and friends from out west. So I'm going to run down the most common things that you need to do to prepare and a lot of the stuff that's often misunderstood. I know that I misunderstood a lot whenever I first moved out here and have since in the past 25 years figured some stuff out. First thing you want to remember is that the media does sensationalize an insane amount of information and takes the worst of the worst and shows it off. We all see the weatherman videos with them showing crazy stuff and they're actually on their knees in a puddle or people are walking by behind them normally. That really does happen. People in Florida often seem unconcerned about a lot of stuff, and understand it's not because we are not taking these things seriously. It's just the emotional level of expectation versus reality is often more than we can stand. And there's an insane amount of boredom associated with waiting for the hurricane to show up, especially once you're prepared and done and everything's closed. There's just nothing to do. So you end up doing some really silly, stupid stuff. And as a result of the internet, we can put it out there. Another thing is all of you back there that want to say, oh, well, this is what I would have done, or that's what I would have done, and not even necessarily meaning to troll. And I'm not talking to the trolls, although if you guys are out there, please feel free, jump in my comments because I would love to have a discussion with you. I'm talking about the people who are really well meaning and just don't understand. I'm hoping that this clears some of that up for you guys. First of all, a hurricane is not a giant tornado. It is not something that sprouts up and then comes and destroys everything in its path and then disappears fairly quickly like a tornado does. That is not how it works. Hurricanes are often devastating. They're massive. They do cause damage, and a lot of it, and in different ways. But we know they're coming. Milton right now heading up towards Florida and across Florida as this is dropping. That hurricane developed very, very quickly, and we still had about a week's notice. Now, the intensity and strength went up and down. And you can go by the scales. The hurricane scale is based on wind. It's not necessarily based on anything else. So when we say Floridians are not really worried about anything over a category, under a category 2, that's pretty much true. Our houses are built to withstand this. There's going to be some damage. Some stuff's going to fly around. The number one rule that I learned when I moved to Florida was when you see the Floridians start throwing their lawn furniture in the pool, they're really getting ready for something. Why do you do this? This looks ridiculous and silly. Well, if you throw it in the pool, it doesn't blow around. It's big and bulky, takes up a lot of room inside your house. And typically the water is not going to blow out of the pool. So it stays safe. You just pull it out when you're done, put it back, and it's not a big deal. Saw a video somewhere a couple years ago. One lady even put her dishes and all kinds of other stuff out there in the pool to try and protect it. I think that was a little bit extreme, but that was a rule of thumb. I was like, okay, if it's going to be cat 3 or more, then we're probably going to throw our lawn furniture in the pool. Another thing, evacuations. In the coastal areas, when you make your choice to buy your house there, you know that that's going to be a possibility from time to time that you have to evacuate because storms are going to come. Storm surge is a real thing, and water will kill you in a large enough quantity and a small enough quantity. You can't do anything about it. You can't stop it. That being said, some people decide to stay and ride it out. These people are not uninformed. They know what they're doing. They may change their mind whenever life starts getting threatened, but they're making a pretty informed decision to sit there and ride it out. And again, this is such a small percentage of the people in reality. Most people, when they're told to leave, when they know that the storm surge is coming, they're ready and they take their stuff and they go. But that doesn't make for good news. The only stuff that makes for good news is the one stubborn person that was stayed against all odds and life and limb. And that's why you get the governors and everybody on here going, listen, you won't survive this if you stay, trying to translate that sense of urgency to the citizens. The other things, 99% of the evacuations go smoothly. People leave in plenty of time. It turns into an impromptu vacation for those that can afford it. We don't have an issue with it. But that doesn't make news. What makes news? Massive traffic jams, which do happen. But 75 on any given day is a massive traffic jam between Ocala and Tampa. It just is. There was news reports, people sitting on the road for 10, 12 hours. I've sat on the road to Tampa from Ocala for more than 2 or 3 hours and not gotten anywhere. And I mean, that just happens. It's just part of that highway's mystique, if you will. Is it worse during an evacuation? Yeah, but is it that terrible? No. That's why it got real easy to say, well, why didn't they reverse the lanes on the southbound side? Well, that would have eliminated linemen, that would have eliminated emergency crews being able to get in. That is a very vast, extreme last measure. And because the backup was not great, but it wasn't as bad as it could have been, that's it. Making these calls is real easy to second guess, but not having all the information and having to make the overall call for everybody is a big, big challenge. Remember that whenever you're making your comments from back there. The other piece of this is, why don't some people evacuate? You're told to evacuate, get out of the way. Or people inland, well, you weren't told to evacuate, but it's just stupid to stay in the path of the storm. There's a few pieces to this. Some people can't afford it. Some people can't simply leave. Maybe they have an elderly relative that can't travel. Maybe they don't have the money. Maybe they don't have a vehicle. There's many, many reasons why people don't evacuate. This does not make them stupid. This does not make them insensitive. They are very well aware of the danger. But the equivalent to that would be, imagine taking your life, packing it up every couple of years and leaving everything that you know. And these people have a very strong connection to their home, just as you have a strong connection to yours. Remember that whenever you're sitting there judging them and understanding that, well, if I were looking down the face of impending doom, I would leave. Well, if it's all you got, you might not leave. If there's people there that depend on you, you might not leave. If your elderly neighbor depends on you and can't leave, you might not leave. There's 1,000 reasons why. And some of those comments can become across as being insensitive, and you unintentionally will hurt our feelings or make us second guess decisions we really didn't have a choice about making if you're personally involved with somebody who lives in Florida but you're not near us. It's a huge choice. It's a huge decision. And then we don't ever talk about the logistics of getting back home, getting back to work, getting your house and your life put back together and all that. Nobody ever talks about that. I'm going to talk about that for a minute now. And this is to do with prep. Well, let me talk about prep first, then I'll talk about that. Hurricane prep should be something, and most of us Floridians do all the time. The panic buying that you see is a very small percentage of the population. Most of us here maintain a steady supply of food. We have an extra fridge or freezer. We are prepared for the contingency. We keep water around so we have clean water to drink, although water rarely gets lost. Most of us have generators. Some of us even know how to maintain and use them so that they don't get messed up. And all of our important documents are usually contained right close together so that we can grab them and go. Suitcases stay packed. There's a lot of different things that you can do. One thing Floridians are terrible at is preparing for a hurricane right after we're done with the last one. I know one thing that I do as soon as we pack up from the hurricane, I make sure that the generators are topped off with ethanol-free fuel, that everything's been cleaned, that everything's packed up and stored, that our bag is put back where it needs to be, which needs to be checked from time to time, just so that the hurricane prep is that much easier. And another thing that a lot of us do, but this doesn't make the news, is as soon as we enter hurricane season, we go and we stock up on staples, on bottled water, on all the different things that we need. The panic buying that shows up on the backside is not the norm. But again, that makes better news, so that's what you show. Now, prepping for a hurricane and getting settled in after a hurricane are kind of the same thing, and they should be done at the same time. You're already inconvenienced. You're already either have been moved out, you are just getting power back, or whatever. The time to do all that prep is right then. It takes a little bit of work, it takes a little bit of planning, but with that little bit of planning saves you so much headache. So you can get things when they're available instead of when they're not, or when you're pressed for time so you can do other things. This prep here, even though we're in North Florida, was a very simple prep for us, even though we had a couple of emergencies come up. Well, not emergencies, but just challenges that weren't normal. We had to go fill in the gaps in our supplies and pulled the generator out. Didn't even bother to start it till yesterday because I knew it would start because I prepped it correctly, and started it up, tested it, put it in the garage. So more so that I wouldn't have to walk out to the shed in the rain to get it. But other than that, that was it. Now we did have some vehicle issues. Clutch went out on the Jeep, and so I ended up changing the part on that yesterday in the rain. But that would have been a massive inconvenience if I had to test the generator, had to clean the generator, carburetor, I had to go and get supplies, I had to do this, I had to do that. It would have been a real pain in the neck. So remember, when you're sitting back, there are things that we can do. We all have a plan for this. Some of us execute it better than others. I'm not going to say I'm great by any means, but I'm better than some of the other folks that didn't prepare at all or don't think about that stuff. Another thing to remember whenever you are in the path of a hurricane is it moves. It's not a living thing. And that cone that they show and alter and animate and everything else show these giant storms. It's not the same near the center of the storm as it is near the outer bands. And this is a perfect example. Sarasota got hammered as Milton came across and is coming across the state. The seawall was being overcome with the storm surge. The buildings down there have water in them. I mean, just see a lot of this devastation. A lot of those buildings are built to withstand that. Now you got to clean them up and redo the inside, but they don't collapse or fall down, although they can. That's near the eye wall. That's the worst, most intensive part of the storm. People tend to think that is the entire storm. Well, up here near Jacksonville, we got about an inch and a half of rain in the last 24 hours, and the winds are about 25 miles an hour. It's nice and cool outside. I went for a walk along the river this morning. Got a little breezy, but nothing crazy. Even though if you look at the radar, we're completely covered. So for those of you that don't usually look at a storm this big and are used to thunderstorms coming in out west or funnel clouds or some of the big wall clouds, it's the same intensity over that entire storm. That is not the way a hurricane operates. A hurricane moves in different directions. It's usually predictable, sometimes not, sometimes harder than others. That's why there's so many different models. They're getting better at that every year. And the intensity of the storm goes down in varying degrees as you separate from the eye wall and from the storm. Study that if you want to. You don't have to become an amateur meteorologist to do it. There's lots of people out there that don't do inflammatory weather reports. And you can go to the nhc.noaa.gov to get directly what the weather satellites and the weather stations are reporting to the news. Once you understand how to read that, that helps. If you're fear for your family, if you don't live in Florida, checking on us early doesn't do any good. Mostly we're sitting around just going about our normal life. And even as it's coming, up to yesterday, we had some rain that was a little bit associated with Milton, but mostly we've just been going through doing what we needed to do and getting prepped and ready. So when you ask us if we're okay, we appreciate it very much. But until the storm passes, there's really not much different we can tell you. In the middle of the storm, yeah, sometimes we can update it. Sometimes we have power. Sometimes we have cell signals. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes it takes a while to get reconnected and get back out there. Infrastructure here is very good at predicting what's going to happen and when, and they have contingency plans. AT&T, Xfinity, IQ Fiber, those guys were all out over the last 3 or 4 days placing generators right next to their nodes so that if the power did go out, they could fire those generators up. They were already in place and be able to keep us connected via internet. So sometimes that's the difference between life and death. Now, when you have an event like Hurricane Helene that just caused massively terrible destruction and devastation up the center of the country, of the Appalachian area, that's not a different story. We want to say, oh, well, that's different. That is an intensive, nasty storm that took out areas that just simply were not prepared for it. Things that only happen every 100 years or so, that 100-year flood. Whether or not you understand, whatever your political association is, the government showed up to help. FEMA showed up to help. The people up there are historically self-reliant, as are most people in different areas of the country. And they started helping each other out. And there's been some tension and fights back and forth. And maybe that's not being handled very well. I don't know. It's real easy to look back and go, well, what's going on? Why is this happening? I would have done it this way. I would have done it that way, which is the point of this whole podcast. help each other. If you're in a path of total devastation, and check on your neighbors, you guys, this is when humanity really comes together and starts making a difference in each other's lives. You know, we don't need any help for that. We don't need anybody regulating that. We don't need anybody forcing our hand to do something that is not to the benefit of our community and our society. If somebody's telling you that, I'm going to encourage you to ignore them and continue being kind, doing what you know you need to do anyway. There is absolutely no reason not to help somebody out that needs it, especially if you have been devastated by a storm, by a tornado, by a hurricane, by an earthquake, by a flood. It doesn't matter. Reach out, and so what? You may not be best friends with these people, but humanity needs humanity, and there really is a lot of goodness in all of us out there. You're going to see that. You've already seen that happening up where the fallout from Hurricane Helene has been, and you're going to see that happening in Central Florida. You're going to see people showing up and helping people that have no possibility of ever paying them back. And half the time they won't even know who they are. I know our neighbor down the street, he takes a crew of guys in his tractor and he goes into these places and he just helps move stuff around and put stuff back together every time. And it's not a thing for him. He does it. And it's a testament to the kindness of human nature. So as you're sitting there and you're not impacted by this, remember, it's very easy to look at this from a bird's eye view and go, well, this should have been done differently, or you should have done this, or you should have done that. One, remember that your words can actually hurt. They have some power over other people. But two, without having been in the situation and having access to all of the information, especially in a time of crisis, you may not be making the same call, and you may have made the same call that those of us here who stayed did make, given the information we had at the time. It is terrifying to sit there and watch and try and understand why people would face what is being advertised as impending doom and just laugh about it. And we talk about having hurricane parties, or we talk about hunkering down, or we talk about hunkering in if you're at a hotel, or whatever it is, wherever you happen to be. It's hard to understand that, but also understand that we've done this before. And those of us that haven't are usually around somebody who's done this before. And if you're scared in the middle of it, reading those kind of comments and seeing all that online does not help. And really, that's the only thing we have to do for entertainment after a while, is to scroll and look and read and check in. So make sure you're sending positive, loving encouragement to the people out here. If you want to help, if you're sending money, if you're sending donations, let me back up. If you're sending money, make sure you're sending it to a charity that's actually giving the money to whoever it belongs to, not keeping the majority of it for the charity and for the operations of the charity. Number two, if you have supplies and you intend to bring them and distribute them, there's a few things you should know. Number one, the infrastructure is usually non-existent in the places that need supplies, so you're not going to be able to get gas. Two, it's going to be incredibly hard to get in and get out of there if you don't know the area, you don't know how to do it, and you don't have a reason for being there. So there are times when you can get to as far as a way station and give supplies and have somebody else take it in for you, or on an acceptable path. These are things to consider so that you don't end up either adding to the chaos or the problems, or stranding yourself while you're in there and being not able to get back out again. Does it mean that you don't need to help? No, absolutely not. Help. Do everything you can. If you're in an area that's unimpacted by this, do everything you can to work in helping that impacted area and making things happen. Just make sure you don't add to the problem by giving. I'd be curious for you guys to reach out and tell me some resources that you have used in the past and different ways that you have helped. I think that the comment section on this will be incredibly helpful, not only now in this season, but in the future. Guys, we appreciate you. We appreciate all the love and support. I know that we're lucky here in North Florida that we did not get impacted by this particular hurricane that much this time. Jacksonville seems to be a fairly good spot to not get a direct hit. There's a lot of people that are out there that are being affected and that do need help, even if it's just positive encouragement. Sometimes knowing people are watching and rooting for you helps more than anything else anybody can do. Same with the victims and the people still struggling to recover from Helene. If there's anything that we can do or anything that we can clarify and help you guys with, then shoot us a message in the comments. And yeah, if some of you guys disagree with me, I'll get on the comments and tell me why. Love y'all. Peace.